Hello and welcome to Thursday Thoughts, in which I discuss my thoughts and impressions of some of the books I have been reading since the beginning of August. I finished Incompetence by Rob Grant. My overwhelming impression as I read this story was that the author was trying too hard to be linguistically clever, which was okay for a while, but the unrelenting cleverness was too clever by half and ultimately became tiresome. Another thing that I didn't like was the preposterous and unrealistic situations the author described, sometimes at excruciating length and in laborious detail, using of course his clever linguistic gymnastics. If there was a plot to this book, I lost it. The story did not seem to deliver the story I was expecting according to the blurb. Instead, the author described a detective getting into all kinds of unrealistic and surreal scenarios. Surreal is fine as long as the situations are in some way credible, but they were not. They were totally unconvincing, and the humour that the author tried so hard to infuse into each scenario just felt contrived and did not work. It was just not funny. Lengthy descriptions of totally impossible situations just leave one feeling incredulous and ultimately unsatisfied. Not a keeper. I read Goodbye Things by Fumio Sasaki, which I read on the day I picked it up from my local library. This book was recommended by Kay at Bookish Therapy. I will leave a link to her channel in the show notes below. The author advocates minimalism as a lifestyle. While this is a Japanese mindset, he has some interesting and worthwhile suggestions to make. I am currently a maximalist, and while I do not aspire to be a Japanese minimalist, I am keen to become a moderatist, a word I have coined to reflect my own approach to life. I do not like extremes of any kind. I prefer the moderate approach. Sasaki owned 1,000 books, and he got rid of all of them. I also owned nearly 1,000 books, but only got rid of about 350 of them. I currently have about 25 books that I am recycling. While reading Goodbye Things, I found 10 kinds of things that I could recycle. I have 1. Pens and markers. Most of them do not work. Perhaps I'm hoping that these magic markers will magically start working. 2. Broken appliances. By putting broken appliances at the back of a cupboard, I have discovered, does not cause them to start working again. 3. Knickknacks. They seem like a good idea at the time, but they're just cluttering up space and gathering dust. 4. Multiples. I have the complete illustrated works of Shakespeare and the Oxford Complete Shakespeare and individual copies of many of the plays and several commentaries of each play, many of which I haven't read. 5. Things never used. These are all the things that we mistakenly believe will come in handy one day, but never do. 6. TV and video equipment. About 12 years ago, my large screen TV developed a fault, so I sent it away to be fixed. When the engineer called me to say that it would cost me more to fix than it was worth, I told him to keep it. I never replaced it, but I still have the Sky box video recorder and cabling stored in a cupboard. I recently got rid of all my videos, but still have all the equipment. 7. CDs. I have a large collection of CDs, both classical and pop, but I never play them now. Instead, I listen to music on YouTube. I recently saw that a shop had opened in Southend-on-Sea, where I live, that sells records and CDs, so I will dispose of them there. 8. Wiring and plugs. Every time I have bought some electrical equipment, there is wiring and plugs included. I have several drawers full of these excess wires and plugs. 9. Old clothes. When I was an accountant, I wore a different suit to work every day. I've been retired for 8 years, but I still have these suits, together with jackets, overcoats, and about 20 shirts, none of which I plan ever to wear again. 10. Old bedding, pillows, cushions, stuffed in the top of the wardrobe, never used, but kept for the purpose of who knows. I read Swann's Way, the first volume of In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, which is a reread after many years. Proust's meandering style is mesmeric and is not about anything in general, but in part 1, Combray is about all the particulars of the memories of the narrator's childhood. Part 2, Swan in Love, I thoroughly enjoyed. He started off preferring another woman, but ends up madly in love with Odette. I remember that a friend of mine disparaged a woman he was having an affair with and then ended up marrying her. I read Tono Bungay by H.G. Wells. It was okay, a bit slow to start, but got a bit better, but then started to bore me. The first 100 pages are merely an introduction, and it is not until page 101 that the story actually begins. Then, at page 122, there is another digression to discuss George Ponderevo's marriage, affair, and divorce, which have nothing to do with the story of Tono Bungay. The story picks up again at page 165, where Wells tells us, "But now that I resume the main line of my story, presented as a miraculous cure-all, Tono Bungay is in fact nothing other than a pleasant-tasting liquid with no positive effects." Nonetheless, when the young George Ponderevo is employed by his uncle Edward to help market this ineffective medicine, he finds his life overwhelmed by its sudden success. Soon the worthless substance is turned into a formidable fortune, as society becomes convinced of the merits of Tono Bungay through a combination of skilled advertising and public credulity. However, none of this is actually portrayed in the novel. As the newly rich George discovers, however, there is far more to class in England than merely the possession of wealth. Wells is not one of my top 10 favourite authors. I cannot categorise his style, but here is a passage that I couldn't imagine W. Somerset Maugham writing. One was marked as clever, one played up to the part, and one's little accomplishment stood out finely in one's private reckoning against the sunlit small ignorance of that agreeable place. One went with an intent rush across the market square. One took one's exercise with as dramatic a sense of an ordered day as an Oxford don. One burnt the midnight oil quite consciously at the rare, respectful, benighted passer-by, and one was magnificent and memorable in the local paper with one's unapproachable yearly harvest of certificates. There are 10 ones in 2 sentences. Apart from this, Wells uses short, disjointed staccato sentences in all of the dialogues, which is undifferentiated in any of the characters, as they all adopt the same style of speaking. Whether this was Wells's attempt to imitate natural speech or not, I don't know, but it makes for very uneven and sometimes incomprehensible dialogue. So although there were some interesting and amusing passages in the novel, overall I did not enjoy it, due to the construction of the novel that Wells employed and the writing style that he adopted. I read Mrs. Craddock by W. Somerset Maugham. This was only Maugham's second novel, and even he deprecated it 50 years later, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, even if it did have some weaknesses. but I'm like a young man in love with his sweetheart when it comes to reading Maugham, and I can see no faults in him and enjoy even his supposed weaker novels, which are more enjoyable to me than other authors' strong novels, such as Tono Bungay above. I much prefer to read anything by Maugham than Wells's most accomplished work. Mrs. Craddock tells the story of Bertha Lay, who, when she turns 21, inherits her father's money and country estate and promptly marries Edward, a handsome, even-tempered and unimaginative farmer. Bertha is wildly in love with Edward and believes she can be happy playing the role of a dutiful wife in their country home. But intelligent and sensual, she quickly becomes bored by her oppressively conventional life and finds her love for her husband changing as she fails to find the reciprocal passion that she feels he ought to have for her. Very soon her passion turns to dissatisfaction and disillusionment, and she begins to evaluate him critically, which turns eventually to loathing and the desire to escape from the stultifying monotony of her life with her unimaginative husband. And now here is a thirsty thought.